Hi. Good evening, everyone. The minister has kindly agreed to take a few questions, but he did have one condition, which was that he did not want to face a group of hungry economists. So that's why we decided to feed you all a little bit first, so that at least you're a little bit more placated. But thank you very much, Minister, for this opportunity. And in a way, I thought your speech was quite powerful in the sense of taking actually a lot of the big forces that most of us here in this room have spent a lot of time thinking about, really that interaction between government, the market, and society. So those 3 points, if you allow me to just summarize it, you mentioned about the role of the state in the provision of public services. Second was about supporting people during shocks. And the third was about capacity building. All of these very, very important points. Now, I think from an outsider's perspective, Singapore is really seen as kind of a great example in terms of really getting that balance between the market and the state right. But I'm sure that this must not have been a linear journey, right? There must have been stumbles along the way, whether sometimes government policies have unintended consequences, or perhaps even perverse outcomes. So I was wondering if you could share with us, in kind of thinking about that interaction between policy and society, kind of what mistakes have happened along the way, and how have you kind of, you, the government, kind of learned from those mistakes?
Yeah, thanks very much, Prakash. I think the point about policy formulation being an iterative process, I think is an important one. We may not get it 100% correct all the time, but the important thing is as a system, we need to be able to learn and then to be able to adjust. So I'll share with you one example that I was involved in when I was in the Ministry of Health. We have this health screening program called Screen for Life, where we would give subsidies to encourage Singaporeans aged 40 and above to go for health screening. And we try to make it as convenient and as affordable as possible. So, if you receive the letter from Health Promotion Board, you can then go for the health screening and you'll be conducted quite near your home. But in the design of this, we put a lot of emphasis on encouraging people to go for the screening, but we may not have thought through the incentives for them to follow up after the screening. So if you receive the results and it's positive, let's say you got high blood pressure or you got diabetes, actually it's not good enough to just screen. That's step one. The more important thing is to then go see a doctor so that you can get a follow-up, you can get treatment, you can get medication. But the way the incentives were designed at that time, we encourage you to go for the screening, but after getting screened, the person is a bit reluctant to follow through to go see a doctor. Well, why? The subsidy for the next step is a fixed subsidy, but the doctor's fees can vary. So I'm uncertain if I go see a doctor for the consultation, how much I actually have to pay out of pocket, right? Because I don't know how much the doctor is charging. I know the subsidy is fixed, but I don't know how much I need to pay. So because of that, not many people follow up after getting their results. And worse, we have a perverse outcome because we try to encourage people to come for screening. So we started giving people NTUC vouchers when you show up for screening. And so there are people who are getting screened like every week, to collect vouchers, but actually don't follow up after that. So that is a problem. So we changed the incentive. We said, okay, one fee that you pay, depending on your background. So if you're a pioneer generation, free. But if you are a CHARS card holder, we charge you $2 or $5. And that $2 or $5 includes the cost of seeing a doctor after you get your result. So with that simple change, we tweaked the incentive. We got a lot more people going to see doctor after they get their result.
So as you were saying in your speech, incentives really matter. Now, I don't want to have the monopoly of asking the questions here. I believe there are mics that are available around the room. We are doing this old school style, so no QR code, anything.
No pigeonhole.
No pigeonhole. But if you do want to ask a question, please raise up your hand, and we'll be able to get a mic to you as quickly as possible. Maybe while we are waiting for people to think of the right question, maybe I can ask Minister another one. Actually, we already have one. Can someone get a mic over there? If you could just kind of introduce yourself first and then ask your question. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Prakash, Mr. Chi. Hak Bin from Maybank. I'm curious. I guess like to know more about what's going on with the Special Economic Zone, and there's a committee I understand on the high-speed rail. Whether you see any chance of that being revived at all, and whether what are the kind of obstacles that might impede it, and whether any updates as well on the RTS link, and the timing of signing for the ultimate deal between Singapore and Johor. Yeah.
Thanks, Hak Bin. I think that question is not just economics. Huh? And our High Commissioner of Malaysia is here, so I don't know whether he wants to add on later. But I will just answer you briefly, Hak Bin. The projects, the RTS, it's progressing well. We are on track. I think the project is going to lead to better connectivity between Singapore and JB. Once completed, I think we will be able to support greater two-way flow, and I think that's a win-win for both countries. High-speed rail, we are awaiting the proposal from Malaysia. We remain open to considering this project because, again, projects that strengthen connectivity between our two countries, I think would bring about benefits. But we do need to look at the terms and conditions and also the specifics of the proposal to be able to assess it. So we will be able to do so after we get the proposal from Malaysia. Yeah, and for the Special Economic Zone, I think the MTI is actively involved in this. I'm not directly involved. I can't give you the specifics. But again, I think it's one of those projects that give us the opportunity to be able to leverage on each other's strengths and in the process achieve a win-win outcome. The limits of our economic growth in Singapore, we will run into, for example, labor constraints, land constraints. And I think this is one area where if we think beyond just the limits of our geography, to see how we can strengthen the connectivity with our region, not just in Johor, but also with other parts in Southeast Asia, I think that would be something that would be good for Singapore and the region. Yeah.
Thanks, Minister. Any other questions from the floor? Yes, back there.
Oh, hi. I'm Ma Lin from Singapore Management University, and I study transportation economics, so I want to ask a question more related to transportation. So as economists, we always do cost and benefit analysis, and when it comes to transportation infrastructure, the cost side is always very clear, but the benefit side is much, much harder to account for. So you can think about the time saved in transportation, but mobility affects many different aspects of our life. It changes your commuting, consumption decisions, and from the firm's perspective, it might changes your sourcing decisions. So in academia, this is something very hard to account for. So I want to ask you, from a government's perspective, when you do cost and benefit analysis for a transportation infrastructure, what aspects of benefits of transportation do you usually think about? So how do you perceive this question? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's equally difficult for us because never easy to be able to do a very precise cost-benefit analysis. There will always be some assumptions that you have to make in your analysis. As you said, the cost part is clearer because you know after the tender how much you need to spend. Benefits will be a little bit fuzzier because you're making certain assumptions. If I give you one example, just to illustrate the point, North-South corridor. Okay, I mean, we designed this to provide more road capacity to support the new housing projects in the north. So there will be more people staying in north, and we want to make sure that there's sufficient road capacity to support them going into town. Now, LTA had a difficult decision. Do you want to do this the old-fashioned way, the traditional way, which is on surface and viaducts, or do we want to use the opportunity to transform the landscape? And so they did a cost-benefit analysis, and they decided that let's do the more bolder and more ambitious one, which is do part of it, a large part of it, actually underground. So shift all the cars to go below the surface, free up the surface space that we can then convert to cycling lanes, bus lanes, community use, greenery, and so on and so forth. But this makes it harder to do, takes longer, costs more, because it's easier to build on the surface than it is to go underground. But we did an analysis and we felt that this, in land scarce Singapore, if we can free up some land and we can then use the land for higher value purposes to benefit the society, to benefit our residents, I think it's worth doing. So we went ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Only in this kind of dinner you get these really academic questions on cost-benefit analysis.
No, we get it in the Ministry of Finance too.
Any other questions from the floor? Yeah, one, is that?
Hi, thanks, Minister. Tommy Shea from OCBC. China and Russia just signed a deal last week to developing the so-called shipping routes in the Arctic area. So what do you see the impact on Singapore's economic interests? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, there will be competition coming from all around. If it's not the Arctic route, it will be other ports that will compete with us directly or indirectly. So I think we can't stop what other people are doing. We are in no position to prevent some of these projects from happening. So what we can do is, within our powers, is to make sure that we remain as attractive as possible, as productive and efficient as possible. So if you look at the shipping, we are not really a major import-export hub port. We are mostly a transshipment hub port. So people come to Singapore not because they are importing or exporting into Singapore, but they want to do the connectivity. Okay, so key thing for us in terms of competitiveness is to make sure that our connectivity remains strong. And connectivity with the key markets, so like India, for example, if they're going to grow their manufacturing, we want to make sure that there are shipping lines that will link us to provide good connectivity between Singapore and India. And then what are the feeder services from the region? Indonesia is also going to grow very quickly with a lot of manufacturing activities. What are some of the connections that we can do that can help to grow this connectivity for Singapore? What can we do to invest in our productivity? I mentioned some of this in my speech: automation, digitalization. So even before the ship arrives, we can already do some of the clearance because the data is already sent ahead of time. But one important point I do want to stress is this. I think the world should not look at investments in port and supply chain in a zero-sum manner. Because what we want is to create the infrastructure to allow trade to be able to be conducted in a more efficient and smoother manner. And I think if we can do that, actually that is good for the whole region, that's good for all the countries, it will be a win-win for everybody. Yeah.
Thanks. Question over there.
Good evening, Minister Chen. I'm Laura. I am an associate professor in economics from NTU, so I'm colleague of Professor Houston Kuo. As we know, early this year, there has been some interesting debate, discussion, in particular in the financial sector. That is why, although Singapore is really vibrant in many aspects, we also have the world's largest foreign exchange market. We have really vibrant, risk market. But why our Singapore stock market is really, declining, okay, by all sorts of gauge. And I'm very glad to see recently you have been appointed to lead a task force to study how to revival Singapore stock market. So I would like to take this opportunity to ask, what do you think the role the government should play and could play in order to boost Singapore stock market? Is this mainly on the demand side or supply side, or are you looking for some synergy to jumpstart? Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. I think we need all to be open to all possible solutions because you're right. This is one of those areas that can't say we have done well, but it is important because a good capital market can allow our companies here to be able to go for listing, to raise capital, and including those that are startups. They started here, or we attract them from overseas, from the region, from around the world, to be groomed in Singapore. And then when they grow bigger and they want to go for listing, we hope very much that they will choose Singapore as a destination for their listing. Now, I can't give you a complete answer because of time constraints, but I will just say this. We are going to do three things. First, listen to the views from the stakeholders, because I think there are good ideas from different parts of the industry. We're going to consult the different stakeholders, gather the views, and then we will be able to cluster them to see where are some of the moves that we can make. Now, second, I think this one, if we want to do it, we got to identify a few bolder, bigger moves. There's no point just doing tweaks, more of the same. I don't think it's going to work. So we need to, after we assess carefully the feedback, decide what are some of the moves that we think will move the needle, what are some of the moves that we think will be more impactful, and then, make a bigger, bolder move, because I think that is what investors are looking for. That's what the institutional investors in particular are looking for. Are we serious about this? And if we are serious, how do we back it up through action? There is an important element as well, which is what I mentioned earlier about growing the pie. Because we are trying to grow our stock exchange. Our neighbors are also trying to grow. The region also has, I think, a lot of companies that want to list, seeking capital. So I think if we can collaborate, we can exchange, we can have an exchange of these linkages with, a connection of the exchanges in the region with better linkages. I think that will be good for everyone. In the end, I think what we want is to make sure that the growth in the actual economy, in the real economy, can also lead to a growth in our capital markets. And then that in turn helps support the growth of the companies, and it will be a virtuous circle. Now, one thing I'm quite clear that we shouldn't go down the path of is this. There are some people who say, why not you ask Temasek and GIC to do national service and invest in Singapore. Even when the returns are no good, do it for national service. I don't think that is the right solution, because it's not sustainable. And for GIC, for Temasek, they have an important role, which is they are supposed to invest for the benefit of the country and the people. And we want them to invest where it gets them the highest return for the people, for the country. If Singapore's returns are good and they invest in Singapore, no issue. But if Singapore's returns are not so good because our capital markets are not so effective, then we shouldn't do this just to prop it up. We should solve the problem more fundamentally by making sure that the capital markets are functioning well, and then not just GIC and Temasek, but many other institutional investors and funds will want to invest in Singapore. So that's what we are hoping to do. Thank you.
I think that was the applause from the GIC table. No, it's a tough problem. As you mentioned, it's a problem that all the regional markets face, but even advanced markets like the UK, I think, are also finding this a tough nut to crack. I think we have time for one last question. Anyone from the audience? Yes, Professor Basan Kapoor. Up here in front, yeah.
Thank you. Minister, Singapore is moving to becoming a more and more caring society, which I think is a very positive development. But I'd like to draw your attention to a letter in today's forum page of the Straits Times, where the writers said that the financial burden on retired seniors from the property taxes on private properties can be quite heavy, running to thousands of dollars, and it may be even growing over time. So I wonder if something can be done about that. I'm aware that there's a concessional tax rate for owned occupied properties, but that rate applies to all Singaporeans of all ages. So can there be a further concession for the retired seniors, something along the lines of the concessionary maid levy, okay, for seniors who hire foreign domestic workers? Thank you.
Thank you. I think we do recognize that the seniors in our society, whether those staying in HDB estates or those staying in private property, some of them would need some help with rising cost of living. So when the Ministry of Finance, when we design some of our assistance schemes, we deliberately design them such that the criteria are not exactly the same. Because if we use the annual value, for example, as the main criteria, and we standardize this across all our different subsidies and grants, then the people who miss out because of the higher annual value of their properties, they'll miss out on everything, right? So instead what we did was some of the subsidies, yes, they are means tested and AV is a criteria for some of them, but there are many others where we deliberately decided not to go down that path and we remove AV as a criteria. The one that's universal, every household will get CDC voucher, right? That's not tied to AV. So the retirees, or for that matter, non-retirees staying in private properties will also receive CDC voucher. For retirees, there is the special payment, cost of living special payment. September, we are going to give out. So if you are a retiree with no income, you may stay in a private property with a high AV, you will still receive the full $400. Yeah. But the property tax, now I know this is a sensitive topic, but if we ask ourselves this question, if you want your tax system to be fair and progressive, tax and redistribution system to be fair and progressive, meaning what? Meaning we will want to make sure that everybody can get some help, and the lower income will receive more help, the higher income will receive some help, but not as much. And then the reverse side of this equation is when it comes to paying taxes, in a fair and progressive tax and redistribution system, the lower income will pay less, fewer taxes. The higher income will pay more. And how do you define who is higher income, who is wealthier? Now, different societies have different ways of doing it. Some societies have a wealth tax. Some societies use other means to be able to tax wealth. In our case, we deliberated this and we felt that may not be the best way forward to use things like capital gains tax, inheritance tax, because there are some complications and some ramifications on competitiveness and other areas. And for us, I think property tax, your property is a proxy for wealth. Okay, so yes, I don't think we should focus on just one tax alone. We should look at it more broadly: income, wealth, taxes, including property taxes. And then, of course, there's consumption tax, GST, corporate taxes as well. Of course, companies do well, they pay taxes. So overall, I think that's the strategy that we want to sort of use to achieve that profile of a fair and progressive tax and redistribution system. So the lower income pay less taxes, receive more help. The higher income and the wealthier people in society pay more taxes than what they receive back from government. So they are a net contributor. But I think in order for the books to be balanced and for this to be fiscally sustainable, we need to make sure that whatever we need to spend, we are able to collect so that we are able to balance our books. Now, if we don't do that, the consequence is that over time, you're going to have a larger and larger deficit, and it becomes a problem. If you then start need to borrow, then we will have the reverse of what we currently enjoy. Because currently, we enjoy the proceeds from our reserves when we invest. And that is used to actually provide about 1 in 5 of our revenue, about 20%, comes from our net investment returns contributions. So that is a very important source, and we do not want to erode that. And that's why in my speech earlier, I mentioned that there's a need to safeguard the use of the reserves for the current and future generations. But we do want to take a look. PM has mentioned in his recent media interview that cost of living is a concern for many of our citizens, for many of our families, including our seniors. So this is something which we will certainly pay close attention to see what can we do through a well-designed set of measures with the proper incentives to be able to help them, but without changing fundamentally the nature of our fair and progressive system. Thank you.
Thanks. So I've had the easy job of just directing traffic here, but Minister really has had the tough job of being in the hot seat and taking really questions on a wide range of topics. So if you could all kind of join me in thanking Minister for taking the time.